Hello there, good afternoon to you. If you are caught up in any way in the cladding scandal that has emerged post-Grenfell, this is the hour to talk to us. Apologies for the other day. We were going to the other day, but things got the better of us news-wise, so we talked about something else. So if you're caught up in it in any way, I'd love to talk to you about it this hour. It may be about the value of your house. It may be about insurance. It may be just about the safety of the building that you live in. And what's prompted this is a report from the Public Accounts Committee, a very powerful committee of MPs in the House of Commons. It's revealed that 3 years on from the fire at Grenfell Tower, only a third of high-rise buildings with flammable cladding due to be fixed have by now been replaced with a safe alternative. So 155 buildings out of 455 buildings. 0345 606 0973 is the number to call if you're affected by this whole situation in any way. Rachel Venables is here to tell us more about what the Public Accounts Committee has said. LBC's correspondent. Hello.
Hello. I've got the report in front of me. I've been digging through it today. And just for background, first of all, Sheila, you know, of course, Grenfell Tower was wrapped in an exceptionally dangerous type of cladding. It was known as aluminium composite material, or ACM. And on the night of the fire itself, it was described by witnesses as fizzing or popping. It melted, it physically melted and rained down fire on those who were escaping, those as well who were trying to get into the building to rescue trapped residents. And years later, the Grenfell inquiry's first phase would go on to conclude that these polyethylene-cooled panels, this ACM cladding, did not comply with building regulations and was the primary cause of the rapid spread of the flames. This cladding was the reason the fire spread so quickly up the outside of the building. But we found out soon after the disaster, Grenfell wasn't the only building, wasn't the only residential building to have ACM. 455 other high-rise tower blocks around the country had that same material fixed to the outside. And after the disaster, the government promised to make them all safe, and it set a deadline for all ACM to be removed, which was by June 2020, so June of this year, of course, a date which has now passed. And this new report from the Public Accounts Committee has found, in fact, that instead of all of these buildings being made safe, just a third of the 455 high-rise buildings with the same cladding have actually had it replaced. The PAC have described this progress as unacceptably slow, and they say that leaseholders have been the victims of a system-wide failure. The chairwoman of the PAC is Meg Hillier MP.
The people who live in these flats are faced with eye-watering bills that are life-changing, that most people just couldn't have think of affording. They're also living in limbo because they can't remortgage or sell their properties. So lives are on hold while everyone is arguing about who's responsible. And ultimately, the failure is system-wide, and the government needs to step in to resolve these situations, because only the government can bang the right heads together to get this sorted. And some of it will be actually around taxpayers' money.
Now, in response to this fairly damning report, a spokeswoman for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government have said it's providing £1.6 billion to speed up the removal of unsafe cladding, saying that they are seeing significant progress, and over 70% of buildings with ACM have either completed, so we know that's a third, and the rest are in the process of remediation, so work has at least started. But on the topic of funding, the Ministry of Housing did make £600 million available to pay for the replacement of this aluminium composite material on buildings over 18 metres. That was a couple of years ago they set this fund up. But this report shows that by April of this year, it had only paid out 134 million of the available 600 million. Now, Ritu Saha chairs the UK Cladding Action Group. She also lives in a tower block in Bromley with this cladding, and she says she's not surprised at all that it's taking so long to make these buildings safe.
It has basically led to a mental health crisis, and not just for me, but for my 56 neighbours. We've lost all hope. We see no light at the end of this tunnel. We were the first building in this country to get approval for funding from the ACM fund, and that was simply because some resident leaseholders fought tooth and nail for it. Only £50,000 of that has been disbursed till date. And we are constantly having to battle with the Ministry of Housing to release money to make our remediation project move quickly.
And there is plenty more as well to dig out of this report, Shelagh. It's clear that the main aim, as far as the PAC is concerned, is to get this work done and soon. The government has now set a new deadline for the cladding to be removed. That's the end of next year, 2022. The PAC says it's imperative that that's met, but it says that the government has, in its words, no convincing plan for how it will meet the new deadline. It also raises concerns about the external wall survey forms, about the lack of skills, the shortage in the available people to do this work, to do the remediation work. And it also raises real concerns about the fact that the Department for Housing has no knowledge of how many of the 40,000 care homes in this country, which are below 18 metres in height, have dangerous cladding. That's a real concern that's picked out in this report.
That would be fairly easy to find out, wouldn't it?
That's certainly what the Public Accounts Committee seems to suggest, because they have told the Ministry of Housing to go away to survey all of these tens of thousands of buildings to find out how many of them have cladding and what type of cladding they have. And it says that it really demands that they start that research by the end of the year.
I'm tempted to say something very ugly, but I won't. You've spoken to an awful lot of people affected by this. You can't underestimate or overstate, I should say, the psychological just rumbling constantly underneath your life that must exist, the psychological fear and nervousness living in one of these places.
Absolutely. I think everyone who I've spoken to has been affected by this in some way, whether they are now really struggling with depression, people who now struggle with anxiety, nervousness, whether that is something that is medicalised or whether they just have that constant sense of unease through their life. And it's dual, really, isn't it? Because there is the fear when you go to bed at night. Is your building safe? Will you be the next, devastatingly the next Grenfell? Yeah. Is your family safe? Are your possessions safe? And there's the financial impact as well, which is these people know that they are going to face huge astronomical bills in cases to fix their buildings. And in the meantime, their properties that they may have put, all their life savings into has been rendered completely worthless.
Rachel, thank you again. Rachel Venables, LBC's correspondent. Listening to that was Stephen Mackenzie, independent fire safety consultant. Stephen, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Rachel touched on the skills required to do the work on these buildings. Just talk us through what they are.
Well, it's a movable feast just now because we've got a phenomenal bandwidth in government response, in net crisis response. We are flooded with documentation, guidance, amendments, calls, consultations, considering and dithering by government. We lack a very clear direction on what is compliant, what is safe, what is acceptable, and then we're constantly criticised in the sector for not having the competency. I would argue we do have competency. We can't cope with the post-Grenfell shocks and stressors, which aren't dissipating, they're actually picking up critical mass. We went from a couple of hundred buildings to a couple of thousand buildings to having almost to assess all buildings. And then the government in its advisory groups is constraining that to a very small pool of chartered engineers and completely ignoring swathes of other qualified fire professionals. It's absolutely perverse now.
Why is there any difficulty in establishing what is safe and what is not? Don't you just in tests set fire to it and see how it behaves?
Well, what do we test these days? Is it the cladding? Is it the insulation? Is it the penetrations through the wall? Is it the internal structure? Is it cavity barriers that stops fire and smoke spread? Is it fire stopping? Is it the fire doors? Is it
well,
the
you tell me.
lifts?
You tell me.
We really need to go back and start from first principles. We need to stabilise the current position. We need to work on sound engineering and performance standards and clean down all the issues that have arisen from Grenfell, Barking, Riverside and other manifestations. We need to have a clear line of sight of stop the madness, stabilise and recover the safety position. The government's actually undermined the sector in the concept of deemed to satisfy standards at time of construction and what constitutes safe now. It's a free-for-all.
But what we do know, or what we understand anyway from this Public Accounts Committee, is that there are buildings with the identical cladding to Grenfell that are still undealt with. I hear what you're saying about the root and branch return to safety basics that you're talking about, but they need removing.
Absolutely. There are only 20 local authority cases of enforcement and 10 by the fire service out of over 2,000 buildings. The government's missed the opportunity to head off the issues with non-ACM. 3 years on, it still hasn't activated all the ACM strip-outs and remedial works. We have got residents caught in the crossfire, and we've got a sector trying to gear up without full and proper funding. 1.6 billion doesn't touch the side. It's not 3 billion, it's not 15 billion, it's potentially 30 to 100 billion to resolve all the issues and stabilise this. Where are the quick wins? Strip off the cladding, enforce it, recover the money later, just get it done.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Mackenzie, Independent Fire Safety Consultant. Worth saying that a story's emerged today, don't have a great deal of detail around it, that a file containing important information about the layout, design and materials used in Grenfell has, the inquiry into the fire has been told that it's gone missing. The laptop on which this information was held has gone missing. Don't people back things up or put them on discs or in the cloud anymore these days? I wonder. Anyway, we'll get more on that story when we have it. But to you, if you are living with questionable cladding, questionable materials around your building, just tell me what you live with for a start, how you feel as you continue to live in this place. Both your safety and the impact that has had on your life, because we know again from Rachel's reporting on this that financially and in terms of your mental health, this has had a huge impact. And if you're involved in this sector in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've just heard there from our guest talking about what needs to happen with regards to safety, full stop, in our buildings. 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850. You can tweet at LBC. It's an influential committee in the Commons, the Public Accounts Committee. But will it change anything? It's 2:15.